For the first time on this show, we have a guest that has started a business post-pandemic, started his business in 2021, which I think we could all agree was a very challenging time. And he built a global remote team as at startup. Eran Mizrahan is the co-founder of Ingredient Brothers. They make the ingredient search and procurement process easier for customers. He's built this global team where both happiness and productivity go hand in hand. Eran, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Thanks for having me, Kendra. Excited to be here.
So just give us a little bit of the background, like what made you think of starting a business in 2021?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when we were starting it, I was speaking to a lot of peers who have their own import businesses. We import ingredients from all over the world, and they were, echoing, why are you doing this in 2021? It's, global supply chain problems everywhere. This is the worst time to start the business. And, I had always seen an opportunity to source ingredients from around the world and add service. And I'd just seen this space, and especially during the pandemic, just being able to lean on suppliers that really matter and like how much, loyalty you have towards them. And so when 2021 came around, I think with a lot of perspective, having experienced the pandemic with everyone else and just, wanting to almost, give myself that kick that I needed. And I called Alap up one day, who founded the business with me, and said, I've got this random idea. Do you want to quit your job and start it with me? And so we just, opened our computers in July of 2021 and started Ingredient Brothers.
That's amazing. I think so. I think is kind of interesting is that you didn't have the before, right? You didn't have the before the pandemic where there was the culture norms and the ways that you ran the team and did the business before the pandemic. It was after the pandemic. So you didn't have the choice to adapt, really, like
No.
a lot of our other guests have. You just created.
Yeah, and I think that, thankfully, that was the biggest advantage because I always think about this. If had I started the business prior to the pandemic, I was very anti work from home. And so I think I would have built a completely different business and been, really closed off to the idea of people being able to work remote, being able to work from home. And even during 2020, I didn't work from home. I was in a warehouse, at nuts.com, and we were on the floor every day. Even if I wasn't packing orders, I was always there present. And so it was like this challenging thing that, starting in 2021 and then coming and seeing opportunity to hire a remote workforce, and really challenging myself. But because, of what I'd seen and what I'd read, I was a lot more open to it. I think had I started this prior to 2020, we would be talking about a completely different business. I mean, we may not even be talking because I think a large part of our success has been our ability to build this remote workforce.
I love that. So I mean, that's an area where I'd say you totally turned the corner because to have had that belief system that you had to be in office and then built this business knowing you can make it remote. Like I'd love to hear what had that experience has been like. What have you noticed that's the advantage of being a remote team?
Yeah, I think it's, really interesting. So there's been so many things that have added to the flavor of what we do. So, if we had not been remote, we wouldn't have been able to hire people from all around the world. And so I think, our team is made up of people from the US, from South Africa, from Colombia, from Argentina, from the Philippines. And so having different perspectives and bringing different people from so many different backgrounds into the room to help solve global supply chain problems, that has given us such an advantage. And so I think from that perspective, that's been like our big unlock that we've been able to feel. I think, there definitely has been so many challenges with starting a business and building process and trying to figure out the rules of how you do business and, what it is that we do and how we do it in a remote workforce and, over multiple time zones. So I think, the challenge is definitely there too. And it hasn't been just smooth sailing, but I think in general, like we do believe in the premise of what we're doing. And so every day it's just about how do we get better and how do we improve those processes.
So one of the things we work with a lot of the companies that we work with, we find that one of the most important things in a remote environment is the leader and the leadership team needs to be really clear on what are the outcomes of a work product, whether it is on a daily basis, a weekly, monthly, yearly basis, whatever it is. But they've got to be really clear on it. Otherwise, I do think that people can get kind of scattered in a remote environment because there isn't really that person to turn to and be like, what am I supposed to do again? Right.
Yeah.
And so has that been one of the things that you've kind of stumbled on as a solution?
Yeah, I think so. I think, very early on, I'm an accountant in many years ago. So a lot of like what I enjoy doing is planning and having a real thought out plan. And so I spend a lot of time planning, and I think we spend a lot of time disseminating that plan to the teams. And so we have every two weeks we have a weekly business review where we go through all the different aspects of the business and how we're performing to our goals. And I think we don't necessarily tell people like how to do their work or what needs to be done. We show them where they need to go, and I think that helps create a lot of alignment. And so we do spend a lot of time on planning, on aligning on goals, on making sure the right resources are allocated to those goals so that we can give the teams the freedom to then go and execute against that. And I think that that's helped us drive things in the right direction. But I think at the same time, it's also been important for me to understand that we are still figuring out how to work effectively together. And so I really try and emphasize to the team, these are the three most important things that we need to get done in order to continue to earn the right to exist. And then I know that there's hundreds of things that they're all working on as a team to improve how we operate together. And I think as long as the three things get done, then we earn that right to operate for another quarter and continue to operate. And so I think as a leader, that's been my responsibility, which is to get that alignment and then give the team some freedom to operate together and build those processes together and give them that time to figure those things out together. Because, I'm not in the weeds every day. I'm not going to, it's going to be impossible for me to help drive those things forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we call that making sure that the teams have agency, making sure that they have all that they need to not only be empowered and autonomous, but that they have the agency to actually get that work done. So I love that.
Yeah, I think, sorry to
No,
just
no, go ahead.
that's something that we've found has been really important when we hire. Obviously we look at our values and try and hire people that align with our values, and someone who owns their own future. Like one of our values is own your own future. And, is someone who's going to, believe that, like, one of our other values is progress is in the doing, finding employees that, embrace that, because in a remote workforce, you can sometimes be left alone and you have to figure things out and you may not feel like you have as much support. And there definitely are people who to some extent value that and like take a lot of ownership and pride in their future, and then will drive those things forward. And so we try and look for that too when we're hiring people.
That's great. So how do you, so I love that you have those well-defined values, because that has been one of the things that I think is actually really, really important, especially in smaller businesses, or small to medium-sized businesses. I think in big business, values can start to not be as important as long as the leader of a team or of a function really knows what they value. But how did you go about figuring that out? Because most startups that we work with don't do it this early on.
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote values before starting the company, and wrote like a mission, vision, values, and it's just maybe because I've come from bigger companies before and had gone through the exercise. But when we reevaluated everything last year, we landed up going to Morocco and taking the whole team to meet each other for the first time, and I thought that would be a good place to refresh our mission, vision, values. And when we sat down and looked at some of our values, I realized that I was lying to myself and that the values were actually the complete opposite of what I'd written down originally. And so it was I think through operating the company for a little bit, and going through that exercise, I'd always find those things important, even though, to your point, a lot of people say they're just words on a wall. I don't believe that. I think that if you echo them and repeat them enough and talk about them enough and hold people to some extent accountable for those values, I think it does help guide your hiring decisions, how you manage, how you run the business. And so we spent a lot of time as a leadership team just figuring out what do we believe in, what are the values that we align with. And I think, came up with a good set that, we tend to, drive forward all the time and talk about quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, we say you want to hire and fire and manage and train and govern and promote and compensate against those values. And if you can't do all that, then they're not real. And if they're
Yeah.
not real, then all you're doing is communicating a really confusing message out to your team, because they're getting hired for one thing, but they're being managed or directed or fired for another thing, and it's confusing. And so, but if there's alignment around the all of that, then I think it makes everything easier. And so I love that you did that so early on. And I have to tell you, that's very rare, just so you know. I mean,
Yeah,
we've
I
worked with
appreciate that.
businesses that have been around for 20 years that never really formalized it. And so good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I did hire a head of people who's been really instrumental in helping, drive a lot of that forward. And I think, that was maybe credit to us for recognizing that we need to hire that quite early on because we were going to scale and we needed someone to be an ambassador for our people, really, and especially in a remote workforce. But yeah, we do put a lot of emphasis in making sure that the people foundation, which I think includes mission, vision, values, and all the other infrastructure that you have to put in place, comes part and parcel with trying to build a high performing team that actually understands what is expected of them.
Okay, so that's another really unusual thing that you've done. Because again, like to bring in HR or head of people, I hate using the term human
Yeah,
resources because as we talked about kind of at the beginning, like it's just hasn't caught up with what the world really needs. So I'd love that
yeah.
you call it like a head of people, but that's also very unusual to do that so early on. Can you talk a little bit more about what is this person like? What are they doing?
Yeah, so I think, just to give some backstory as to why, I've had the luxury of, I'm starting this business, let's say, a little bit later on in my career. And so I've worked in organizations with really large teams and have seen the benefit a head of people can have on the executive team, right? And I think a lot of times when you're a small business, you look at HR and you're like thinking benefits and payroll. And that is, not short-sighted, but like there's so much more that goes into building infrastructure around the people org that will help scale. And so I think that was important to me, was finding someone who could, almost take control of that so that we have the right organizational structure. We understand how to promote people. We understand how to pay people. We have consistency. I'm a big fan of consistency in rules because you don't want the person who puts their hand up or shouts the loudest to get everything, right? You want to be able to have that rule book that you can say, hey, no, that's not how we do it. This is the structure. This is the process. And everyone adheres to that. And I think I'd been in places where that didn't exist always. And I saw that, it's not always the fancy things that make people feel valued. It's like the simple things. And so that's why, we went and looked for someone and found, someone who has incredible experience, both in large organizations, but also with a smaller company that was growing really fast. And I think she, managed to come in and just sprint in so many different directions because there's compliance and there's benefits and there's processes and there's performance reviews. But it's given us that roadmap where we feel a lot more in control with the structure we have and the organization that we're building.
I think that's amazing. How many people do you have?
So we're closing in on 40 now,
Okay.
but I'd say last year this time we're probably about 9. So we've experienced a significant amount of growth in the last year, especially in hiring. And so that comes with a lot of its challenges too. But we've gone from we're about 40 right now.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. Yeah, we always recommend that I mean, there's kind of two different types of organizations that we typically work with, but one is an organization that grew up with no HR at all. And then maybe has like, there might be 60 to 80 employees now and they have like a part-time person internally, but they have none of that infrastructure. And so we work a lot with those types of companies. And then we also work with the companies that are like you, that are the fast growth and are, in a startup mode, but are growing rapidly and need that infrastructure so that you don't lose people. And so I think it's just very wise of you that you brought in HR that early. I just think that's great. And again, very rare.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I got a lot of advice from people, and I think a lot of people, and I'd listened to a lot of podcasts. I think a lot of people are starting to realize it. So I don't think it was necessarily a novel idea, but I do think that there is a little bit more emphasis of being able to understand that. I think, having seen what how valuable that partnership can be on the executive level in building a company, I think that a lot of times small businesses or entrepreneurs who don't have experience in bigger companies don't realize that. And I think that's, that can be a pity. And they think that they need to spearhead the culture. They need to spearhead performance reviews. They need to spearhead salaries. And that, you know, I think people discount the importance of building that at the same way you would build any other function within your business.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we all have our gifts, right? We all have our
Yeah.
strengths. You happen to have a background for systems and processes and consistency coming from being in accounting.
Yeah.
It might not be your natural wiring to also then additionally think about how that person might respond to something. And I mean,
Yeah.
someone on the team needs to be thinking about the people. And I mean, I'm naturally wired to do that, but I realize now that I'm not normal. Like that's not how every other CEO thinks.
Yeah.
I just happen to think like that, and which is probably why I'm in this business, right? And but I think I always say like somebody has to be a steward for the people,
Correct.
because
Yeah.
otherwise you're just going to be wasting money. It's so expensive. In addition to being inefficient, it's a huge cost to the bottom line when you're just turning people over all the time that you might have been able to actually get them on board and get
Yeah.
them working and being productive.
Yeah. I mean, especially in supply chain where so much isn't written down and you're learning and there's a lot of accumulated knowledge as you go and you do things for many years, that retention is incredibly important, right? Like we need people who see the patterns and understand what they're doing all the time. There's just so many different things that can happen that experience is very valuable. Experience within the company is even more valuable. And so yeah, we really put an emphasis on retention and trying to, you know, give people a place that they feel like they can stay for a number of years and they enjoy. So, you know, I mean, we're still very young, so you know, maybe you'll have to get me back in a couple of years to see if that actually played out. But that really is the aim. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think too, I mean, by way of just experience, I guess, like I've also learned that you want to create an environment where you get your employees for as long as possible. Not that they should stay forever.
Yeah.
I see our jobs as like a stepping stone. They're not going to stay with us forever. And I
Yeah.
think if we set up that expectation, I don't know, it feels devastating when someone quits. And I don't want to be on that roller coaster every
Yeah.
time someone leaves. And so I now see it a little differently. I treat it a little bit more like
Yeah.
just as long as I've gotten, ROI on them, which I know sounds kind of a little bit harsh, right? But
Yeah.
they've stayed with me long enough that we've made money, and then they've learned a lot, they've gained a lot. We've learned a lot. Then, like when they go to move on, I'm like, okay, this was a very good relationship we had together. I just don't want them to leave too soon
Yeah.
or have to let them go too soon, right? That's when it's. I think that's a bad business decision.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that's super valuable, and I always push my employees and people that I've worked with before, which is, you know, every quarter you got to be putting a bullet point in your resume, and if you're not, then you should speak to your manager, right? And it's not necessarily like actually putting a bullet point in your resume, but you should be doing work that is different every quarter and adding value in a different way or growing so that you can continue to, you know, grow within the business. Or if you need to leave or want to find something else, that you have a resume that stand by, you know, you can be proud of. And I think a lot of managers sometimes will become complacent and allow people to do the same thing all the time for many years. And yes, if that is the person's desire and goal, then that's okay too. But a lot of the times it may not be. And I think having an environment where we talk about that and like, okay, what are you adding on your resume this quarter? Like, what are those 2 or 3 objectives that you're working on that you can put on your resume that's quantitative, that's measurable, that you're proud of, so that either you're going to get a promotion and we're going to look at that and say, yeah, this is what you did, it was measurable, and we understand what the value you added. Or if you were to go and look for something else that, you know, you can be proud of the resume that you're delivering. And I think that's something that's really important to me and links a lot back to like our goal framework and how we think about running the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's great. I think that's a great philosophy. I've always kind of adapted a couple, things around, there's all these different models like the EOS model, which you might be familiar with, a entrepreneurial operating system. And they have kind of a model for vision tracking and your goals and all that. And I really like what you just said. I think I'm going to adapt the way we do that to say, we call them the rocks, kind of based on that model. But I like what are your resume builders? I think that's a more positive way to look at it.
Yeah, I like that.
I do too. I do too. So thank you. I appreciate that gift.
No worries.
So can we switch gears a little bit? I want to talk a little, and if you don't feel like you have the insight into this, I totally understand. But I feel like we need to start having a conversation around technology and people. And I'm starting to really feel that in many ways, technology is actually in its infancy really hurting relationships and harming our ability to do business because it's creating so many shortcuts. And so for example, just to by way of giving a little more context, one of my former colleagues, who I'm still in community with, she had been applying for jobs, trying to get a new job, was getting rejected, even though like I would hire her in a second. I mean, she's very, very qualified,
Yeah.
and her resume looked great, but she was getting rejected. And we figured out the reason she was getting rejected was just the robots,
Yeah.
the algorithms. And so anyway, it ended up being a phone call that I made to one of the companies that I happened to have a relationship with, and she ended up getting a job. So there was this like, human to human connection that created that. When I see things like that happening where technology is actually causing issues, I start to get kind of worried. Are you noticing anything like that? Like anything coming to mind on your end?
Well, I think to try and think about like where that impacts us at Ingredient Brothers, I think that there's definitely, when you've now got barriers where physically you're not in the same room and you're using technologies to communicate, so many times things can get lost in translation, right? And people have a tendency to avoid meetings and want to avoid FaceTime because we've been taught that if you have too many meetings on your calendar, that's not effective, and you should be put it in an email if you can. And I think that to some extent is true, but what I noticed is that promoting more and more work time together where there is face-to-face time and like working through problems, which I think in a physical office, you get that a lot easier where like, oh, at the end of the day, everyone's like relaxing, having a conversation. You start talking about the problems and you start solving them together. I think I've seen that become a barrier where a lot of it is very transactional. And, we try and be proactive in meetings to not just start a meeting and actually ask people how they're doing and, have more casual conversation because we're not leaving the conference room together at the end and grabbing a cup of coffee. And so I think that has been the one place where, getting people to spend a little bit more time together, understand how they work, work together, how they can work together better so that, things don't get lost in translation when you just do things on a system or put a comment somewhere or send a Slack message or an email that it just gets interpreted the wrong way. And I think that definitely, we're starting to realize that, how do you create that balance of, almost not forcing the interactions, but making sure those interactions are happening so that people are not just building transactional relationships, but actually building more meaningful work relationships where they solve problems together the way that you would do in a physical office. And I think that that's something that we've only started to realize could be detrimental. And we're starting to put together framework for, how to try and, bring that to life at the company.
Mm-hmm. Have you had another face-to-face meeting since the one in Morocco?
No, we're hoping to have one later this year if we hit our goals. But, we did it the first time in October last year, and we were about 20 people that went. And I think the one thing I will say that, counters what I just said, but you just realize the bonds that everyone had built already when they met for the first time because it was so special. And it was amazing to see that it wasn't like strangers shaking hands. It was like friends meeting for the first time. And like this, I mean, it was just a really life-changing experience to be able to do that and, be able to see people from different countries that like I just think again, like pre-pandemic would never have happened. And now those connections are being made and barriers are being, like broken. And I think that was incredible. So like as much as technology hampers to some extent, like we did build real bonds. Like it did take meeting in person to realize how real they were, but they were real and really strong.
I love that. Yeah, that's very hopeful. It's very
Yeah.
hopeful. We used to have a physical office that we paid like almost $8,000 a month for.
Well,
And now that I don't have that on my P&L, I'm just like travel budget for getting together.
yeah, exactly.
It's
And that's how I
much
look at it.
cheaper,
Yeah,
much cheaper,
exactly.
really,
Yeah.
and way more fun.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
you can get people out of their normal routine and allow them to think. And you can actually drive a lot of valuable conversations when you do that and compared to in an office, right? So I think, yeah, it's a good way to use your budget.
Hmm.
I'm very pro the travel budget instead of renting an office.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I've really focused on and with our team is when we do come together, I make it all about team building. I'm very curated, very intentional about it being more about building the team up. And so we do a lot of not just team building activities, but really deep work around getting to know each other better and helping collaborate better. Sometimes I bring in outside experts to come in and present and give us more skills.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really playful and silly, like we went axe throwing one day, and which I'd never done in my life. Um, Bowling, like we've done just all kinds of things that,
Yeah.
in the, front at a surface level, you kind of be like, well, that's sort of cheesy, but it was really, really fun. And when people
Yeah.
have fun, they feel more bonded too. And so that's the other thing we've been doing is just because we are actually all in a similar area. Like we don't have to fly to come together, but we do have to do a fairly big drive to come together.
Yeah.
And so we've just made it really intentional.
Yeah. And I think that is really powerful. And so, one of the things we have done is try to hire in similar, well, same countries. We do tend to find people in different regions within the country, but like we have a lot of people in Argentina, a lot of people in the Philippines. And so we create moments for them to come together, right? Going to Morocco is obviously incredibly expensive and takes a lot of planning, but being able to create moments within, different countries so that smaller teams can come together. We have trade shows where we fly people in. And so, yeah, to your point, that fun, that being able to, build, do team building and allocate budget to that and create those moments for people. I think, some of our employees have taken it on themselves now, and a lot of our employees go away together, and some of them have never even met and end up going away for the weekend and traveling. And I think that's again testament to what you can build from a culture standpoint, even if you're behind a computer screen all day.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's because you've been so intentional. I mean, you didn't just put it together and then cross your fingers and hope it would work. Like you've been very intentional, and I think that's one of the big things I'd like our listeners to take away is that you built this culture wanting it to be focused on the people, recognizing that you had to invest in the people, and because you did that, it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pretend to take credit. I think yes, we were very intentional, but I think we got like we hired amazing people that also drove and were really great culture ambassadors. And I think I definitely appreciate that. I think it's tough to to take the credit because so much of it felt like it was organic and it happened naturally. And but it again, like maybe it was the values that we had and the values that we hired against, and the people that we were able to attract, or the people that were attracted to this kind of opportunity are naturally more open-minded and want to explore and are and are open to doing different things and taking a chance. I'm not sure which one it is, right? But I think it is definitely amazing to see, and really grateful that we do have this type of culture, because it is really hard to reverse a bad culture. So I'm glad that we're starting from a good place.
I think that's a perfect place for us to stop. My goodness, I am so grateful for this conversation. You've just been amazing, Eran.
Thanks so much.
Totally amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on
Thank
How
you.
I Turned the Corner.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope it was good.